The attempted assassination of Donald Trump is set to provide the Republican Party with a major boost in the run-up to the November US election. The Australian share market closes at a record high, and the highest-paid CEO last year made almost $50 million. Welcome to Fear and Greed, daily business news for people who make their own decisions. It's Monday, the 15th of July, 2024. I'm Julian King, filling in this week for Michael Thompson, who is having a well-deserved break. And good morning, Sean Aylmer.
Morning, Julian. I would never say he's having a well-deserved break. I'd just say he's having a break.
Leave me out of this now, Sean. The main story this morning, the fallout from the attempted assassination of Donald Trump at a rally in Pennsylvania over the weekend has quickly become very political, with one of the favourites to be Mr. Trump's running mate in November, JD Vance, saying the Biden campaign's rhetoric led directly to the assassination attempt.
The gunman apparently shot at the former president 8 times. One clipped the top of Mr. Trump's ear, sending him to the ground, quickly covered by Secret Service agents. Another killed a spectator, and 2 others at the rally were critically injured. On his own social media platform, Truth Social, Mr. Trump said he'd been shot with a bullet that pierced the upper part of his right ear. A 20-year-old man shooting from an elevated position, or at least what's described as an elevated position, was killed soon afterwards by the Secret Service. His motive thus far is unknown. World leaders and the Republican and Democrat officials condemned the shooting. President Biden, in a nationally televised statement, expressed gratitude that Mr. Trump had been swiftly evacuated and said, I quote, "There's no place in America for this kind of violence," end quote. He later spoke to Mr. Trump, according to the White House. The Biden campaign said it was pulling down its television ads as a sign that it was putting politics aside in the aftermath of the shooting. A video released yesterday, Australian time, shows Mr. Trump deplaning in New Jersey, walking down the stairs and giving a wave. So he looks like he's okay.
Yeah, head of political climate in the States at the moment. Sean, what are the political implications of what's happened? While the act itself is inexcusable, will it help the Trump campaign?
Already the image of Mr. Trump, seconds after being hit, lifting his fist into the air, is being used by some to highlight his courage. It's already political. The image will be one of the lasting memories of the assassination attempt. As you mentioned in the opening, one of Trump's potential running mates is blaming the Biden campaign already. That's JD Vance. Mr. Trump's former Attorney General, Bill Barr, blamed what he called grossly irresponsible talk about Trump by Democrats for the shooting. The majority of politicians, though, are calling for a cooling off period to take some of the heat out of the ferocious rhetoric from both sides of the aisle. The incident will certainly hold back the Democrats and Joe Biden from being overly personal in their criticism of Mr. Trump in the run-up to the November election. That could well work in favour of Mr. Trump. Donald Trump's reaction in a few days' time, when things do cool down just a bit, is the big unknown in all of this, Julian.
Yeah, indeed. Let's hope there's not an escalation of politically motivated violence off the back of this incident. How did local markets close on Friday?
Sounds like a long time ago, doesn't it? Look, the S&P ASX200 hit a record intraday high of 7,996 points after jumping 1% on opening before paring gains to close up just under 1% to 7,959 points. Shares in Commonwealth Bank rose again, this time to a record high of $131.60, pushing its market value to $220 billion. Now, Commonwealth Bank is, as we start trading today, the largest company on the ASX, just pipping BHP. It was the interest rate sensitive stocks that did best on Friday. Among the sectors, the real estate and consumer discretionary stocks performed well. Online property group Domain Holdings and REITs, Charter Hall and GPT were among the top performers. The worst were the tech stocks, Computershare, WiseTech Global, NextDC, for example. The big question now, we're at 7,959 points. Can the bourse push through 8,000 points today? Given Wall Street's strong performance over the weekend, maybe.
And Sean, immediately after the show, you've got a good chat with Dan Farmer. He's the Chief Investment Officer at MLC Asset Management.
Yeah, I sure do. We talked to Dan about the different sectors to invest in property, private credit, how MLC thinks about its investment portfolio, what's impacting the share market, how it's not just what it's done over the last 12 months, but what Dan thinks is going to happen going forward and where they're overweight certain positions at. It's a great chat for anyone interested in investing.
Yeah, stay tuned for that. On to international markets now, thanks to Blue Chip Communication, the experts helping financial services companies market, communicate and grow. Visit bluechipcommunication.com.au. What happened over the weekend?
Wall Street ended high, though Mr. Trump's shooting has markets braced for some decent-sized moves in coming sessions. Assets trading over the weekend, some do. They've already shifted, with Bitcoin pushing through $60,000 a unit on the back of traders believing the assassination attempt will actually bolster the Republicans' chance of winning the White House. There's something out there known as the Trump trade. Assets that investors believe will benefit if Mr. Trump is voted in as president. They're already starting to appreciate. They include the US dollar. That could mean the Aussie dollar could lose some ground. It means bond yields are likely to rise. Equity markets are also likely to jump under a Republican presidency. Though we're in the middle of the June quarter reporting season, so that's probably slightly more problematic over the next few days or so. But that whole idea of a Trump trade is certainly coming to the fore in international markets.
We'll be back in a moment with the rest of the day's business news. Sean, Labor is under pressure to launch a royal commission or judicial inquiry into the CFMEU after explosive allegations of misconduct by the militant union and its officials.
It's an incredible story. A major investigation by the Australian Financial Review, The Age, the Sydney Morning Herald and 60 Minutes found underworld figures have infiltrated major Victorian and New South Wales construction projects, with some securing jobs as CFMEU delegates. It also revealed how outgoing CFMEU boss John Setka, who quit on Friday, made a menacing nighttime visit to the family home of a fellow senior union official to dump a suitcase scrawled with a message attacking the official as a dog. The allegations prompted Workplace Relations Minister Tony Burke to seek advice on options to take over the organisation, that's your CFMEU, or potentially deregister it, according to the Fin Review. Mr Burke labelled the allegations abhorrent and said he was exploring every single power available to him. Three of the nation's leading business groups, the Business Council of Australia, AI Group, and the Australian Chamber of Commerce and Industry, have already called on Labor to immediately launch an independent judge-led inquiry. We're going to hear plenty about this one.
Now, school holidays in the winter months have put a dent in house sales, with the nation's preliminary clearance rate falling to 71% over the past week.
Nearly 1,500 homes went to auction, which is down on average, and Sydney recorded the biggest slump, with the early clearance rate going from 76.7% a week ago to 68.9%. It's the first time this year that Sydney's rate has fallen below 70%. In contrast, Melbourne's preliminary clearance rate jumped from just over 70% a week ago to 73%. Brisbane's rate also tumbled to 63.5%. It had been 79%, so quite the fall there. Adelaide came in at just under 85%. Canberra was about 64.5%. They were stable. All in all, though, it's the middle of winter, school holidays. Probably wouldn't read too much into these figures, Julian.
Yep, indeed. BHP will mothball its nickel mines in Western Australia, hitting hundreds of employees as well as operations at other miners in the region.
BHP announced the suspension on Thursday night and foreshadowed an underlying full-year loss on nickel of $450 million. It blamed a global oversupply of nickel that comes from Chinese-backed producers mining in Indonesia. BHP said it will try and find jobs for as many workers as possible. The BHP nickel business has been losing about $50 million a month. And earlier in the year, BHP wrote down the value of the business by about $5.4 billion. The big Australian has invested $4.4 billion in the nickel business since 2020, but global nickel prices have tumbled. They've gone from about $25,000 a tonne to about $16,000 or $17,000 a tonne. Now, that's forced the miners' hand, and BHP are mothballing things. Following the announcement, rare earths miner Lynas said the BHP suspension would hit it. Now, it uses sulfuric acid for its $800 million processing plant that it's building. Thing is, sulfuric acid is a byproduct of nickel. So if BHP isn't doing nickel, you're not going to have the byproduct of sulfuric acid, and therefore people like Lynas are going to be hit as well.
Sean, ResMed's US-based Mick Farrell made $47.5 million last year, topping the ranking of CEO pay amongst ASX-listed companies.
Coming at number 2 was News Corp's Robert Thompson at $41.5 million, then Greg Goodman from Goodman Group at $27.3 million, and Shamara Wickramanayaka, the CEO of Macquarie, whose realised pay was $25.3 million. Now, Mike Henry at BHP rounded out the top 5 at $19.6 million. Combined top 5 earned $161 million in realised pay. That's a lot of money. The annual study from the Australian Council of Superannuation Investors looks at realised pay rather than fixed pay. Now, realised pay includes salary, might have a bonus component, and the value of stock they're given. On average, the CEOs earned more than 50 times the average Australian adult. Other highly paid CEOs was Rio Tinto's Jakob Stausholm on $10.4 million, Commonwealth Bank's Matt Comyn on $10.5 million. Webjet's John Gusick was the highest paid outside the ASX200, so among the smaller companies, he still made $7.5 million. Mind you, median CEO pay actually fell last financial year from $3.93 million to $3.87 million. That was the lowest median in the 10 years of the Axis study. The ASX 100 to 200 median also fell from 2.1 million to about 1.95 million.
Yeah, fascinating figures. I wonder what the shareholders think of all of that, Sean.
Yeah, especially since ResMed, I mean, Mick Farrell made $47.5 million. Now, ResMed has actually had a pretty poor run of it recently, so I'm sure some shareholders won't be overly impressed by that one.
I can't imagine. Speaking of shareholders, Sean, the largest shareholder of Regional Express is pushing to kick out the carrier's entire board just 1 month after he stepped down as the company's executive chairman.
Yeah, amazing story. So a guy called Lim Kim Hwai, a Singaporean businessman, had run Rex until June. Then he abruptly left the board, handed day-to-day management to the airline's chief operating officer, a guy called Neville Howell. Mr. Lim and his then business partner Lee Thian Soo became shareholders back in 2002 after Rex emerged from the collapse of Ansett, which now Ansett had operated 2 regional carriers. Rex grew out of that. These two took a big share in it. On Friday, Rex told investors that Mr. Lim had called for a shareholder meeting to remove Mr. Lee, his one-time friend, invested in Rex all those years ago. He also wants to kick out the airline's new chairman, former Federal Transport Minister John Sharp. The only director Mr. Lim doesn't want to remove comes from a group called PAG Asia Capital. That's a major private equity firm that's put about $150 million in funding into the airline. Anyway, it seems he wants to get rid of all the board and just keep, the private equity group. Don't know who else is going to get in there. Unlikely to succeed, but it's actually quite an extreme play for Lim Kim Hwai.
Yeah, fascinating story and one to keep watch of. In international news, some of the biggest banks in the US reported earnings over the weekend. Citi, JP Morgan Chase and Wells Fargo released earnings and all suggested that the world's biggest economy, Sean, is cooling.
Yeah, so we're getting into reporting season in the US and it'll be really interesting to see what it says about the economy. JP Morgan and Wells Fargo reported that their overall deposits fell and they had to lift the average interest rate on checking and savings accounts. Good news for borrowers, obviously, but not so much for the shareholders and the banks themselves. Wells Fargo said its net interest income, the difference between what it pays on deposits and receives on loans, a bit like a profit margin, fell sharply. Citi said its poorer customers are suffering most. JP Morgan, which is actually the largest bank in the US, said it made a quarterly profit of $13.1 billion, but it also lost more than $500 million on poor mortgage repayments. Anyway, we will keep watching earnings season on Wall Street. Big tech stocks are next week. That's always pretty exciting.
It is. Now, up next is the Fear and Greed Daily interview with Dan Farmer, Chief Investment Officer at MLC Asset Management.
As I mentioned earlier on, all about what MLC like and dislike in terms of asset classes. Certainly worth listening to that one if you're an investor. If you're an investor or an economist or anyone interested in the economy, you should also listen to The Week Ahead with Stephen Koukoulas, our normal Monday interview. Very exciting week this week. We have labour force figures for June. Now, we all talk a lot about inflation. The other side of the economy is labour force, and we want to make sure that unemployment rate doesn't rise too high. So we find that out on Wednesday.
That's up next in the Fear and Greed playlist on your podcast platform or at fearandgreed.com.au. Thank you, Sean.
Thanks very much, Julian.
It's Monday, the 15th of July, 2024. Make sure you're following the podcast. Join us online at LinkedIn, Instagram, X, TikTok and Facebook. Have a great day.